Also, anyone who has seen me talk about this before, the first half of this will feel very familiar to you, but after that it won't, so bear with me. Okay, let's start with some research questions. First of all, on Twitter, can use of a hashtag trigger variation in women's use of linguistic features that have historically been associated with gender and power? And if so, what are the effects of that variation? So here's the roadmap I'm going to be following. I'm going to start with some contextual background of my data set for those of you who aren't familiar with the hashtag YesAllWomen on Twitter. In spring of 2014, a guy named Elliot Rodger went on a shooting spree near the campus of UC Santa Barbara. He killed 6 people and himself. And in the aftermath of this attack, it became very clear that it was motivated by misogyny. And we know that from a whole trove of online content that this guy had generated, talking about how much he hates women for rejecting him his whole life, and he wants to get revenge on them, and so on. And this started a public discussion about whether this was actually just an exceptionally violent symptom of a more systemic issue. The idea being that, well, not all sexism results in extreme outbursts of violence and shooting rampages. Are men socialized in a generally misogynistic atmosphere in which they feel entitled to women's bodies and actions, and then feel entitled to revenge when their desires are not met? Now, a counter-argument to this discussion became known as the not all men defense, or the not all men are like that defense. That argument goes like this. Millions of men are socialized in more or less exactly the same environment, and yet they don't all grow up to be murderers, so it can't possibly be a systemic issue. Don't blame the system, blame the individual. Don't hold all men accountable for the actions of one deranged lunatic. So this not all men line becomes co-opted as a satirical cliche, and then a meme, playing on the idea that if your response to this discussion is not all men are murderers, you have entirely missed the point of this discussion. And in that spirit, on Twitter, a lot of women started using this hashtag YesAllWomen in a response to the phrase not all men. So here's a good early example. Not all men practice violence against women, but yes, all women live with the threat of male violence every single day all over the world. In other words, we're not generalizing about male behavior with this discussion. We're generalizing about the female experience, and that women know how common sexism really is, even when it doesn't result in headline-grabbing violent outbursts. So, quite a few of these examples. I'll read a couple of them. Yes, all women know what it is to be constantly interrupted. Mocked for voicing legitimate concerns, called crazy for resisting oppression. I have a boyfriend is the easiest way to get a man to leave you alone because he respects another man more than you. Yes, all women because apparently the clothes I wear is a more valid form of consent than the words I say, and so on. So the purpose of this hashtag was to, first of all, draw attention to the more everyday, lower level kinds of gender discrimination that women endure, and to offer solidarity and understanding to other women who have to face this on a regular basis, who previously may have felt silenced. And this goes very viral very quickly. This is tweets per hour with this hashtag, so it starts in the afternoon of the 24th, and then by afternoon the next day, it's up to about 60,000 tweets per hour. It gets tweeted millions of times in a couple of days. And fortunately, someone collected all of those, or at least many of them, and I got access to 2.7 million tweets tagged with the hashtag YesAllWomen. I culled that down to about 500,000 after removing retweets and duplicates, and those 500,000 were authored by about 260,000 unique Twitter accounts. I then sorted all of those by who authored the tweets, and then ordered the authors by how many tweets they had contributed to this collection. And I pulled the top 200 contributors, so the 200 Twitter handles with the most tweets in this collection of YesAllWomen tweets, and then manually inspected them to be sure that they were actual humans and not bots or organizations or something like that, that they self-identified as women, and that they were still active on Twitter. And that left me with 140 Twitter accounts. And those 140 women contributed an average of about 70 tweets each to this corpus, totaling almost 10,000 tweets by 140 women about gender discrimination and equality. Now, I wanted to do an intra-speaker variation study, so I needed a control corpus with the same speakers, So I took those 140 speakers and I scraped their Twitter profiles to get as many of their most recent tweets as I could. Twitter caps that at about 3,000. And I removed retweets but didn't otherwise screen for anything. And that left me with an average of about 1,900 tweets per author, totaling over 270,000 tweets by the same group of 140 women about anything. So as I was doing this, I was reading a lot of classic literature about language, gender, and power, which served as a really useful starting point to figure out what features I would actually be looking at. And I started with the sort of classic stereotypical features of women's language from the 1970s, which then later was reanalyzed by some scholars as powerless language in the 80s. But I was looking at it from the perspective of something that could be identified algorithmically and at scale. So I ended up focusing on markers of politeness, use of profanity, non-standard forms, and hedges. And here's why I chose those. So according to this classic women's language or powerless language paradigm, female or relatively disempowered speakers in a conversation, all else being equal, are often expected to be more polite, to swear less, to hedge more. Oh, it got cut off. Oh, that's too bad. And to use relatively fewer non-standard forms with respect to like stable non-standard variants. And the stereotypes persist. So that literature has been problematized and complicated over the past 30 or 40 years, as I'm sure you all know, but there is still a persistent idea that men and women speak differently, and you don't have to look very hard to find evidence of that, especially in non-academic literature. So, for example, here's an op-ed from the New York Times from 2015 by a woman about how women apologize too often and they need to police themselves to apologize less because they're actually doing themselves a disservice. This is an article about whether it's unladylike for girls to swear, and regardless of what this article concludes, the premise depends on the idea that it is somehow marked for profanity to be produced by a female speaker in a way it's not marked to be produced by a male speaker. This was an article by a female tech executive who was arguing that women say just too frequently, especially in its capacity as a hedge when they're requesting things in the workplace. Things like, I was just wondering, or if you just had a minute, could you just take a look at this, and so on and so on. And again, arguing that women need to correct themselves and use this less because it is signaling subordination or disempowerment. And it got to a point where someone actually wrote a plugin application that will look at email drafts and point out weak language, so where you're saying sorry or just, and then make suggestions to strengthen your message. Interestingly, all of the media coverage of this app described it as a plugin for women to help women compose emails. The developers never mentioned gender in any of their promotional materials, but the world still interpreted it as an app for women. And maybe it was intended to be, but they never say that. So, whether any of this is grounded in reality or not, there is still this conventional wisdom that men and women do or perhaps should speak differently. Okay, so here's what I was looking for. In the category of politeness markers, I was looking for things like please, thank you, thanks, and sorry. In the category of hedges, I looked for, I guess, sort of, kind of, it seems, maybe, and so on. I looked for all profanity that you can imagine, and so on. And in non-standard contractions, I was looking for stable non-standard variants, okay, the bottom inch of my slides are not visible, but in addition to stable contractions like wanna, gonna, and I'ma, and various spellings of those, I also looked for accent apostrophes, so in otherwise standard contractions like don't, can't, or wouldn't, whether that apostrophe was missing. Now, this is a Twitter data set, so we have a character limit to deal with. So you may be concerned that contractions and apostrophe deletion could just be motivated by that character limit rather than some sort of registered use or something. And it doesn't actually appear to be the case. I don't have time to explain why right now, but if you want to ask me that in the Q&A, I'm more than happy to get into it. Okay, this is why my spacebar isn't working, because there are all these dots that aren't appearing. Okay, so I have my data, I have my features. Within each corpus, I have my two corpora. I counted each author's uses of each feature using a Python script and regular expression. expressions, and then express that as a proportion of occurrences of that feature per tweet to account for differences in sample size. Apostrophe absence was calculated differently. That was expressed as a percentage of all contractions used, so any viable environment where an apostrophe was deleted, was it? Or where an apostrophe could be deleted, was it? And then I paired measured t-tests on the two corpora for each feature bundle. And here's what I found. So, we have the light blue is the yes all women corpus on the left, and the dark blue is the control corpus on the right. And we see significantly lower rates of politeness markers in the yes all women corpus than in the control. We see significantly lower rates of hedging in the yes all women corpus than in the control. We see a significant increase in profanity use in the yes all women control. Although this group, I think, is pretty sweary in general. I think they're just kind of a foul-mouthed group of women, but they're even more foul-mouthed when they're contributing to feminist discourse. We see a significant decrease in non-standard abbreviations like wanna and gonna, and we see a similar thing happening in the apostrophe deletion. So non-standard spellings and contractions overall are less frequent in the yes all women corpus. So here's a brief summary of what I just said. There appears to be a systematic and statistically significant interspeaker variation in which language in the yes all women discourse is marked by less hedging, less politeness, more profanity, and fewer non-standard forms relative to general discourse produced by the same female speakers. Now, okay, so that's kind of a macro look at what's going on, but I want to get a closer look at the data to show you what kinds of work is actually being done by this variation, specifically with regard to the author's positioning vis-a-vis the audience or the content of the message. So in other words, what kind of stance-taking work is being done by this interspeaker variation. So I'm going to start with politeness markers, specifically use of sorry, because I noticed something happening in one corpus that was not at all happening in the other. So these are all from the control. Can you read these, or are these too small? Okay, good. So these are all instances of apologetic sorry, where sorry is being used sincerely, but specifically it's being used to apologize for something. Insincere sorry, sarcastic sorry, was rampant in both corpora. It was definitely more represented in the yes all women discourse, something like, I'm sorry I don't want to be harassed on my way to work, or oh I'm sorry if I offend your delicate masculine sensibilities, that kind of thing. So there was a lot of sarcastic sorry, but of these sincere sorries, we didn't see any apologies in the yes all women corpus. But we did see them in the control. So here we have things like I'm sorry for all this navel-gazing I'm doing, I'm sorry my tweet was poorly written, sorry I didn't intend to include you, I'm sorry I yelled, I'm sorry I made a reference to Samuel Beckett, and so on. So not necessarily an admission of guilt, but some kind of apology. Of the sincere sorries in the yes all women corpus, they were all along these lines. I'm sorry to hear that, I'm sorry you went through that happened to me too, this is heartbreaking, I'm sorry ladies, sorry to hear that, etc. So not apologies, an expression of solidarity and understanding, but no admission of wrongdoing. Okay. Another thing that was very asymmetrical between the two corpora was voicing of the profanities. So in the, all right, so consider these three examples. These are from the yes all women corpus. We have some profanity here, we have one there, we have one over here. And these are all single voice. They're coming from the author's voice herself. She's using profanity to express her outrage or frustration or whatever, but it's definitely from her. Now if you compare that with these three, also from the yes all women corpus, this is embedded in a direct quotation in recorded speech. This is in scare quotes, suggesting that it's not her word, but rather a word that has been directed at her or at other women. Here they're not in scare quotes, but the implication is still that this is not a word she's literally using to describe herself, that this is language that she is subjected to from other people. So these are double-voiced in kind of a Bakhtinian sense. And this kind of double voicing of profanity did not appear in the control corpus. However, they all got counted as profanity, even though single voice profanity and double voice profanity are doing completely different kinds of discursive work. They all got counted because they're still choosing not to censor themselves or not to speak euphemistically. And they do actually censor themselves sometimes, just not when they're talking about feminism. So here's an example of that. So this woman, April, has no problem with profanity. She swears in the yes all women corpus, like I think the rest of them. But in the control, she frequently censors herself, usually with asterisks. And she never did that in the Yes All Women corpus. So here's a tweet about football where she used asterisks instead of just using the word. This tweet is still about the patriarchy, but it's not tagged with Yes All Women, and she censors herself there too. So whether she's talking about something consequential and weighty, or something a little more trivial, she's doing it. Whether she's directly addressing another Twitter account or not, she's doing it. She does not do it if there's a Yes All Women tag in there. Okay, here's another example. This woman hedges a lot in the control corpus and never hedged in the Yes All Women corpus. And all these examples are like indicative of patterns that we saw again and again and again. So here's a particularly hedgy tweet of hers. Maybe it's just me, but Obama having a Pinterest seems silly. There's a lot going on in that sentence that's distancing her from the propositional content of what she's saying. And then the Yes All Women corpus, she never did that, even though she did it all the time in the control. So here's a strongly worded tweet. And in a lot of cases, she even dedicated valuable character space to emphasis. So here, not only is she not hedging, but she says, Yes All Women because I'm really, with all caps and an asterisk on either side, I'm really glad my walk to my parking garage is during daylight to the police station, would be scared otherwise. And B, you'll notice, is just the letter B, not BE. So she did actually run out of space, but she cut off the B rather than take out one of these asterisks next to really. Yeah, so she's not, she hedges a lot, but she never does it there. And she was one of many that followed that pattern. And finally, with respect to the non-standard forms, here's an example of a woman who uses gonna all the time in the control corpus, even when space is not an issue. So this is a pretty short tweet, so it's not because she needed the characters, but she just used it because that was the register she was using. It is directed at a particular person, so that could affect the register. But the point is, gonna is in her lexicon, and she's perfectly comfortable using it very frequently. In the Yes All Women corpus, she doesn't do it at all. And she does have some environments where gonna is licensed. So things like Dr. Dre is proud of beating women and Apple is going to make him richer. Or because this guy is still going to get rich after beating a woman 117 times, comma, getting probation. This one is especially interesting because this comma is actually a space-saving measure, I think, because it's standing in for and or an ampersand or something. But rather than condensing going to into gonna, she swaps out and for a comma. So she's preserving that more, slightly more standard register. Okay, so with all of those patterns in mind, let's revisit these research questions. Can use of a hashtag trigger variation in women's use of features associated with gender and power? It looks promising. And next, what are the effects of that variation? So in my analysis, I'm arguing that when contributing to this Yes All Women Twitter discourse, women, while they do express solidarity with one another, they're generally less sensitive to the face needs of their imagined audience. And we see evidence of that in the increase in profanity and the relative decrease in politeness markers. Furthermore, they're less likely to use hedges, and they're less likely to use standard abbreviations, and that lends them an authority and a certainty and a legitimacy. And that authority is being drawn from two different places. So first of all, is that going to get cut off? Yes, it is. Okay, so the authority is being drawn from two different sources. First of all, they're speaking from personal experience, so they are thereby authorized to talk about their own lives because they're talking about the experiences that they share. But furthermore, using fewer non-standard forms suggests that they may be using a more standard or prestige variety, something more closely approximating prestige variety, which gives them a more externally validated, kind of institutionalized sort of legitimacy. But they're still swearing a lot. So they're swearing a lot, but they're swearing in more prescriptively, grammatically correct structures. Because that shows that they have access to these prestige varieties and all of the social capital that accompanies access to that register. So these two processes combine to form a very authoritative and empowered stance, which then when used iteratively, repeatedly by a lot of people, contributes to this process of group online feminist identity construction. Okay, more. Okay, great. So where do I go from here? I want to know how how generalizable this is, first of all. Is this simply a response to this particular hashtag? Is this triggered by feminist discourse in general? Is it just the gravity of the subject matter? What other kinds of discourses will trigger this kind of pattern? This was a very unsophisticated engineering task. I'll be the first to admit that. But it was a first pass to see if there is actually something worth studying here. So now that it looks like there is, I would like to revisit it. I didn't do any part of speech tagging. I didn't do any n-gram modeling. I think there would be a lot of interesting stuff to learn from that. And finally, I want to know what's going on with the men. I know, poor neglected men. So when I first designed this study, I wanted to have that another dimension of comparison, to compare men and women to each other in addition to themselves. But I didn't have enough data over time. So first of all, I want to know if men on Twitter are stereotypically masculine in their language use, and if they are contributing to feminist discourse constructively, not as trolls. The linguistics of trolling would be a separate, also interesting project. But when they're contributing to feminist discourse as allies, is there an effect happening there? Is there convergence? Is there accommodation happening? And how does that differ from the effect of a male-dominated space, which is really the rest of the internet? How does a female-dominated